Colin Powell once said, "There are no secrets to success. It's the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure." And we couldn't agree more. This is Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. We'll talk to people from all walks of life and pick their brains about their journey, the process, and the ups and downs to becoming successful. You want inspiration and motivation? It all starts here. This is the Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. And now your host, Kyle Sullivan.
What's going on, champions? Welcome to another episode of Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Today we have Jake Kauffman. He's an international transformational coach, spiritual mentor to purpose-driven visionary men and entrepreneurs who are seeking to grow in life and leadership. You can obviously tell why I wanted him on the show just by that alone. He supported hundreds of men to thrive and reach the next level in all areas of life, business, and relationship. He's got a book that we're going to dive into, I'm sure, but his mission is to help men radically heal and transform so that they can achieve their full potential and fulfill their purpose. Jake, thanks so much for being on the show today, man.
Kyle, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I am as well, dude. It's, just the bio alone, people have been listening for a while. They're like, oh yeah, this makes sense why y'all are having this conversation today.
Yeah.
But man, who is Jake behind the bio?
I'm going to give you an answer that you probably haven't heard before in all likelihood, which is there is no Jake Kauffman. There is simply God doing God's will. And I say that to say most men think that they are in control. But a primary tenet of returning to wholeness when it comes to male initiation is that you and I are not in control. There is no Jake Kauffman. I have died, and it is, Christ who lives in me, or a higher purpose who lives in me, which is the ultimate intention of coaching, of self-help, of transformation. It's to move us into a relationship with a higher purpose and a higher power. So there is no Jake Kauffman.
Ooh-wee. We getting deep quick, man. I love this, and I love the purpose of it. It's like, yeah, we're a catalyst for what God wants to do. And and I love that, man. And so no one gets to that place just, wake up one day and go, oh, I have this awareness. I have this belief. So man, what's the story leading up to that?
It's a great question. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Awareness is simply the first step. In the work that I do with men, and I'm sure the work that you do with your clients, exposing the wound is simply the very beginning. We then have to go through the work of actually treating the wound so that it can heal. Right? We have to heal before we can transform. That's the unfortunate, uncomfortable truth. What that has looked like for me, historically speaking, in my journey is around 10, 12 years ago when I was roughly 26, 27, I acknowledged for the first time this experience that I had roughly 15 years prior was sexual abuse. And then coming into relationship with all of the different various ways that I was masking, simply playing a part, playing a role, putting on a persona in order to be loved, accepted, and eventually, of course, successful. And so it wasn't until I came into relationship with what had happened to me, until I reconciled my pain. What was I doing? I was unconsciously recreating it in the present moment. And that's where most men are at, and that's what most men are doing.
So what did that masking look like for you? Because obviously you, in the midst of all that, you did have a lot of success, and sometimes I think it could be hard for men to even explore that what you have done in the midst of success is like, no, I'm good. I'm good.
Totally.
Like, I got all this going on. I don't need to dive into this. We're good. We're going to suppress that. I'm going to keep winning. Like, how is that?
Yeah.
What was that moment where you're going, I've got to deal with this?
Great question. I mean, there are two great catalysts for transformation, and that's great love or great suffering. And so for me, and for most men, unfortunately, it seems as if we kind of need like a knock upside the head and to wake up. For me, that was continuing to repeat various patterns in my life, in my relationships, in my career, in my business, until I finally woke up to the fact that, it seems to be that, I'm maturing, and yet I'm repeating these patterns. And although I didn't have language for it at the time, what I would ultimately say to my clients today is that the pattern always reveals the problem. And so what that looked like for me was, fearing love, connection, and intimacy that ultimately had me unconsciously push away relationships. So in romantic relationship, I would find some insignificant, inconspicuous reason as to why I should break it off. In job and career, I would reach a certain level of success, but had a difficult time, getting to the next level beyond that. And oftentimes that would have me end up getting let go from that job. In fact, I've been fired from every job that I've ever had. And so it wasn't until, I'm in my late 20s and I'm coming around to the reality that, like, oh man, I seem to be repeating various patterns, no matter the relationship, no matter the job or the position, whether I'm working for somebody else or whether I'm working for myself. I seem to continue to create this cycle of self-sabotage, and it just is following me around. What's behind that? What's driving it? What's motivating it? And, this is especially true for men who are seeking to get to that next level in their life, but for some reason they struggle, or for men who get there and yet on some level are unhappy and unfulfilled internally. So same package, different bow, same song, different dance. It just manifests itself slightly differently for men. In terms of the masking, to answer your previous question, what did that look like? It looked like me acting as if. So after the abuse, I started to become obsessed with health and fitness, right? Because if I curated this perfect external appearance, then I wouldn't get taken advantage of again, like I was when I was abused. I started to act as if I was fine, as if I had it all together, as if I was successful. And I was to a degree, but internally, I felt like there was something missing. I felt like I was meant for more. I felt like I was only scratching the surface of my potential. So there was this internal interpersonal conflict that had me at odds within myself, that no matter what level of success I found myself at, whether it was, working for a $1 billion corporation, or whether it was, starting my own multi-7-figure healthcare technology company, I still felt empty and wanting. And that was a self-imposed prison. So I ultimately needed to figure out how to get out of that prison. And I spent years looking to all of these external things in order to answer that question, but none of it ever sufficed.
Man, this is really, really powerful. And I think a conversation that a lot of men need to have, but maybe are unwilling or afraid to have. How do you get people to have such breakthrough as you do in your work? I know you said, okay, it's kind of like people change when they want to, or they're forced to. What are some of those things where it's like, okay, for the masses, because I'm even sitting here going, okay, like, I know, thank God for my counselor, I worked through a lot of what you're talking about. I'm going, okay, yeah, sure. I've suppressed some things, I've had this, but it's really kind of like the work you're doing is like taboo in masculine culture of, what we talked about is the before. So
it's not it's not driven by faith, family, fitness, and finances.
No,
because that's a really beautiful way to mask, mind you.
Okay, talk about that.
There is nothing wrong with the conscious desire that fuels one to improve in any one of those specific areas: faith, family, fitness, or finances. However, what I'm most interested in the work that I do with men, is the unconscious motivation beneath the conscious desire. Because whatever is residing in your unconscious, that's the truth. That's reality. Not what we say we want, right? But what we do. And that's true here too. What I'm interested in is your unconscious motivation beneath your conscious desires, because that's reality. And the unfortunate reality for most men is that the pursuit of faith, fitness, family, and finances is simply an adaptation or an overcompensation in order to bolster their own self-importance. They're trying to claim victory unconsciously over a fundamental lack of self-worth. And it fuels the pushing, the reaching, the striving, the efforting in an attempt to do so. That has more men at odds within themselves than ever before. How does this manifest with like a lot of my clients, for example? They'll get a 7-figure business, multiple 7-figure business, even an 8-figure business. And they'll be like, why do I still feel the same way? Why am I still anxious? Why am I still stressed? Why am I still on some level unhappy, unfulfilled, empty, and wanting? That is a sign that you've been overcompensating and that you've been performing in an attempt to avoid your pain. And by performing, what I mean is you're playing a part, you're playing a role, who you think you need to be in order to be loved, accepted, and successful, but who is not actually genuinely, authentically you. It's just a persona. It's a mask. It's a part of your personality that you have taken on in response to pain or in an attempt to avoid the possibility of pain. And that's where I found myself. That's why I started to mask, because the last thing that I wanted to have happen was to get abused again, was to get taken advantage of again.
Okay, man, that's so good. How do you get to a place where you go, okay, this is the authentic me, separate from all the things I would be, posing as, or because I'm going, God, I need to do more work. I think we all do. It's a journey, a progression. But I mean, I've been asked questions by my circle of like, hey, you're good separate from what you produce. And I'm like, what am I? And so it's I
can hear that, but can I receive it?
Yeah, I in theory. So what work must someone do to start this journey, man? Like, to start diving into like, okay, I need to explore this, and here's what I can do as I'm listening to this right now.
I do believe that our task is not to pursue success. I think our primary task is to pursue and uncover the barriers within us that stand against it. Because what ultimately happens is that success naturally ensues as a result. It's the effect. It's not the cause. Faith, family, fitness, finances is unfortunately the cause for too many men. It's not the effect. It's not the overflow of investing into one's soul. Because the soul has no problem going slow. And what do most men struggle with in this day and age? They struggle with anxiety. They struggle with stress. They struggle with overwhelm. They struggle with burnout. Burnout is not a result of working too much. Although that is true. That's the external manifestation. The internal underlying motivation is one driven by the need to overcompensate, that has us at odds within ourselves. And that ultimately, and unfortunately for so many men, despite their external success, has them not know peace.
What does someone at peace look like to you?
Well, they're very relaxed, first and foremost. It's very much a paradox. Like, for example, the key to getting what you want is to stop wanting. Because what do you do when all of a sudden you stop wanting? You relax. And what do you do when you relax? You do what comes most natural and authentic to you. And by virtue, you get what you want. They're relaxed. They're very content. I mean, how many men do you talk to are simply not content with where they're at and are driven by this mindset that I'm capable of so much more? I'm only scratching the surface of my potential. Which, don't get me wrong, when we're young and when we're adolescents, that's helpful because it allows us to develop this healthy ego structure that we need to form confidence, to know that we have what it takes, and like establish our own interdependence. The problem is most men get stuck there in this proving stage, in this efforting stage, where they're chasing after success externally. But when you start to dig beneath the surface and you have a really honest conversation with them, what are they really after? They're after validation, affirmation, or approval.
Jake, you brought up a good point that in the beginning, when you're younger, it's kind of like, okay, you need to have this drive because it builds that good. When, it may not even be an age, because if you're starting something later, but like, when do you need to have the awareness of like, okay, this needs to shift towards not pushing in this way and not chasing so much?
Yeah, I think there are a few benchmarks. In terms of age, I don't know that this can happen before you're 30. Truthfully, I think this really starts to come online when you're in your mid-30s. It especially happens when you begin to have children. And you know this as a dad to young kids. All of your innate selfishness is like fully exposed the moment you have children. Because now it's no longer about you. In the beginning, it's all about individuation and seeking to establish ourselves or make something of ourselves, right? To become rich and famous, for lack of a better phrase. But if you do this work enough, it was always meant to lead you to transformation and transcendence. So I don't know that, this might be a beautiful concept for somebody listening who's like in their mid-20s, but I don't know if it's possible for someone to fully come around to this idea until they're in their 30s to mid-30s. That, everything that I've been after and pursuing and chasing, I haven't actually been after those things. Although that's been the external driver. The internal driver has actually been one of wholeness, of internal peace, of love of oneself, of acceptance and affirmation from another. It's never been about any of these other things. Our ego makes it about that so it can hide the truth from us, because that's how the ego maintains the status quo, right? Its number one goal is to hide the truth from you. At least that's how it maintains the status quo. And so we finally start to wake up to this reality when we have a big dose of either great love or great suffering. Great love being, hey, now I'm a father. Great suffering being something like death, disease, divorce. When all of a sudden, right, like you mentioned, we're forced to change because of trial and tribulation and all these external circumstances that are kind of forcing change upon us. A couple months ago, I had a client tell me, after about a month of working together, he's like, Jake, I'm realizing that my first $1 million was in an unconscious attempt to prove my father wrong. And it left me more unhappy, more unfulfilled than ever before. Despite having everything that I set out to achieve, despite having everything that I said I ever wanted. And so when you think about that, you realize very quickly that oftentimes our greatest strength is really just an adaptation or an overcompensation to avoid experiencing pain.
Boy, we about to have church. I say that because in my work with my counselor, I've realized that a lot of my personality traits, I'm like, oh, this is just the way I am.
Right.
Because I got daddy issues and I needed to work through that. And I, one of my toxic traits is I make jokes about emotional things. And so I've learned that through counseling, but it's just such a powerful thing, man, of what you're doing. And I don't want us to not have this conversation and talk about like your book that, it's one thing to be able to be online and talk about your story and talk about what's going on, but then you put that thing into print and it's like, all right, it is out there. Like you can't delete it. You can't unpublish it. And so talk about the book, talk about, man, that journey of, I'm sure healing that came from you sharing your story and then just like how's that impacting folks and how have you seen it been beneficial?
Yeah.
There's a lot in that. So take it wherever you want.
No, absolutely. So like I said early on, it's one thing to expose the wound and come into awareness of it, which I did in my work with my counselor when I was in my late 20s. It's a whole other thing to go about healing it, treating the wound so that it can heal. That for me looked like when I finally shared my story of sexual abuse on social media. And if we think about the process of alchemy, the process of transformation, what's the first step? It's confession. And the Catholics actually had it right. When they place this importance on confession, when we finally acknowledge the truth, then we can do something about it. But until we do that, we're just kind of dancing around the issue. And so the moment I did that and the moment I shared about my story, here I am thinking, that I've done a ton of work on myself. And, I've been in the personal development space for several years now and gone to a lot of workshops and hired a coach. And so now I feel like I'm in a position to share my story. And when I did, this mask of needing to have it all together and look good was ripped away. Now, everybody knows my most shameful secret, my deepest, darkest secret, that I have, again, been performing my way around for 2 decades. Now they know. And in sharing, the level of connection that was created by virtue of me sharing was just too much for my nervous system. And I ultimately had a panic attack and suffered from what is clinically referred to as an acute nervous system breakdown. So my entire nervous system collapsed. My reticular activating system in my brain was just like tripped. And it caused me to have like a severe panic attack. And so that's when I started to journal at the encouragement of my therapist at the time to help me process the things that were coming up for me. Because again, here I am thinking that like I've done a lot of work on this, and yet now I'm tapping into it in a deeper way, in a more significant, profound way than I ever have before. And you and I both know this healing and growth that happens in layers. And so here is this whole other layer that's been exposed, and that's made very apparent the need for deeper healing, for deeper transformation. And so ultimately those journal entries became the book, because as I was writing, as I was processing, as I was asking myself these introspective questions that were really supportive in my growth and healing, I was like, I bet other people could benefit from this. It wasn't just like a sob story. It wasn't for pity's sake. It was truly thinking, that people could benefit from this. And in my work with men, realizing that so many men have been through something similar to what I've been through, if not significantly worse than what I've been through, yet they've never shared it with anybody. They've never shared it with anybody. Oftentimes, I was the first person they ever acknowledged that to. Their partner didn't know, their wife didn't know, oftentimes their parents didn't know. And this was true for me as well until I kind of came clean in my late 20s and told my family and acknowledged it to a therapist and eventually to a best friend, that I was able to start to undo all of these various personality traits that were born as a result of it. Right? Our personality isn't who we are, it's who we've become. And most of those personality traits, some of them are genuine, of course, but most of our personality is made up of these adaptive traits or characteristics in response to pain or in an attempt to avoid pain.
Well, I had to write that one down. Our personality is not what we're born with, it's what we've been developed into. And it's that alone, because you hear folks that go, I was an introvert, very surface level. I was an introvert, and then now I actually talk to people or, whatever. And I think about how my personality has grown. And, I've talked to my grandma a lot once I had kids, like, hey, how was I as a kid? How was I, whatever? And, and they're like, I can't believe you're doing what you're doing now. Mm. Because you were not this way as a kid.
Sure.
And, and some of the things that I've come back to, things that I once loved that I had deemed not, whatever. So I really, really love this, man. And the work you're doing, there's very few men in this personal growth development space that's willing to be as vulnerable and like just transparent as you are. And so I really appreciate it, man. And where can people find more? Get the book. We'll link all of it. But where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to buy the book is obviously Amazon. Let Love In, The Pain Stops When the Truth Starts by Jacob Kauffman. So it's my full name. And then my last name is spelled Kauff. So 2 F's, MAN. My website, you can also pick it up there, as well as sign up for our newsletter, which is awakewithjake.com. And then the best place to interact with me, if you care to engage, is my Instagram handle, which is I am Jake Kauffman.
Perfect, man. We'll have all that linked in the notes. This, as I assumed, could have been a much, much longer conversation, and maybe we'll have you back for a repeat, man.
We'd love to.
Before we let you go, we got one more question for you, and again, no two answers are the same because no two people are the same. But Jake, what does it mean for you to be a champion?
Weakness.
Okay.
There is no more Christ-like quality than weakness. We've all made the resurrection about Jesus overcoming sin. So it's all been about the victory, which is true, absolutely. But what's not paid more attention to is the weakness that he voluntarily took on in allowing himself to be crucified, which is why before the crucifixion, he actually prayed to God and asked, like, Father, would this cup pass from me? That was a moment of significant weakness. And that's something that is oftentimes overlooked. You mentioned the power of vulnerability. It's a paradox, vulnerability. So was Jesus being crucified on the cross because it displayed powerful powerlessness. In acknowledging my weakness, in Christ taking on weakness, that was the ultimate display of power, not rising from the grave, 3 days later, although that was inherently powerful. It was much more about him taking on weakness, becoming powerless. And that's what vulnerability does as men when we take that on and we choose into sharing the more painful parts of our story or the less than ideal qualities and characteristics about ourselves that egoically we're tempted to hide.
Done and done, man. I freaking love it. And what you're doing is powerful. You're helping, thousands of men. Continue to do so. And you definitely helped us today, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Unleash the Champ Leadership Podcast. Our passion is to talk to successful people and hear all about their journey and what it took to get there. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit up the website at unleashthechamp.com. Find us on Instagram at Kyle J. Sullivan and hit up that Facebook page at Unleash the Champ. Remember, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving.